Morning, friends, and welcome to another First Friday Facebook Live. I am joining you here from our Blue Hole exhibit, which is on the second floor in our Temperate Gallery. So we thought that on a cold, wintry day here in Boston, we'd help you pretend like you're on a tropical vacation this morning by sharing this beautiful Caribbean reef ecosystem that we have displayed here for you. So first and foremost, what is a blue hole? Well, from underwater, this is what a blue hole would look like. But from above the surface, this is what a blue hole would look like. So as you can see, it looks like a big blue hole, but this is actually all surrounded by water. So how blue holes get their name is actually from this difference in water depth. So blue holes are very, very, very deep, but are often surrounded by much shallower waters. So they get their name from this contrast in the blue between the shallow and the deep water, which is pretty cool. Blue holes are essentially a sinkhole or a cavern, a marine cavern, and how they are formed is just like other caves. So before the Ice Age, things like rainwater and other sorts of environmental factors erode the stone, usually in limestone areas. And as the water kind of moves through these spaces, it carves out these caverns. And we actually know that blue holes were once above sea level because of what you're seeing at the top of this exhibit. So these are stalactites. And stalactites are formed in caves by actually water dripping through the ceiling of the cave. So they are mineral deposits from that dripping water. So if the water was dripping, it was at one point it was above sea level. But after the Ice Age ended, sea level rose quite a bit, and so these became flooded. And the ceiling falls out, and that's what creates that open surface that we think of when we think of blue holes. So blue holes can be along coastlines, kind of out in the ocean, or they can be landlocked, but they are a little different from cenotes, which are usually caverns or sinkholes that are eventually filled up with water. So these are actually marine ecosystems, and what we're showing you here is how this really unique habitat has this kind of cool cave and reef environment kind of mashed together, which is pretty amazing. So a little bit about some of the animals in our blue hole. Of course, I have to talk about the showstoppers in this exhibit, and that is our Goliath grouper. So our Goliath groupers are a little bit camera shy this morning. They are all the way at the very back corner of the tank. And our Goliath groupers are probably one of the biggest fish that we have here at the New England Aquarium. They're both a little over 4 feet long and weighing in at over 100 pounds, but they are not even close to as big as Goliath groupers can grow to be. In fact, Goliath groupers can get to be up to 8 feet in length and weigh in at close to 800 pounds. Because they're really, really big fish, they are pretty slow growing, so it takes them quite a long time to get this big. Our Goliath groupers were actually wild caught, so we don't have a birth date on them, so it's a little tricky to know how old they are. And because we keep their tank a little lower than their natural environment, temperature-wise, it actually slows down their metabolism and causes them to grow a little bit more slowly as well, which is kind of interesting. But my favorite thing to talk about is actually one of the most frequent questions we get about the Goliath groupers. What are they doing in this really cozy cave-like ecosystem? They look like they're way too big in order to be in this tank, but in fact they are not. This is their preferred type of habitat. So Goliath groupers are something called thigmotactic, which is a very fancy science word for they like to be in contact with things in their ecosystem. That contact, that touch, actually makes them feel safe and comfortable. So I like to say that our Goliath groupers are professional snugglers because they'll find a nice cozy spot in their tank and they kind of wiggle in and snuggle in, and that's exactly what they're both doing this morning. They found a nice cozy spot at the back of the tank. The probably other reason why our Goliath groupers prefer this one particular spot at the back of the tank has to do with another really amazing fish in our blue hole exhibit, and that is a type of fish called a goby. And gobies are a cleaner fish, which essentially means that they help to keep bigger fish in their environment clean. And the way that they do this is actually by swimming all over the groupers and eating things like parasites or dead skin off of the groupers. Now, Goliath groupers being a really big fish, that creates a lot of surface area for things to grow on their bodies. And out in the wild, this would often mean little tiny parasites. So what they would do is they would pull into one of these cleaning stations that the gobies have set up, and then they will open up their mouths, fan out their gills, and kind of hover in place, which is a posture that says, little goby, I am not going to eat you, please come over and help me. And then the gobies, sure enough, they'll swim right over to the groupers, and you'll start to see them actually moving all over the groupers. And sometimes, if you're lucky, in this exhibit, you can actually catch them swimming in the grouper's mouth and out the grouper's gills, which is really cool. This is not the only tank that has these gobies. We have gobies in our giant ocean tank, which is another Caribbean reef ecosystem that you can enjoy while you're here at the New England Aquarium. And fun fact about the gobies in both of those exhibits is they are actually siblings. So the gobies in this tank and the gobies in our giant ocean tank were both part of our larval fish program. So we are working on raising a lot of different animals here at the aquarium, right here at the aquarium. So from eggs through those little tiny larval fish all the way up to adults that we then will add into our exhibit tanks. This is a slightly more sustainable way in order to get fish for our exhibits, which means having to take fewer fish from the wild, which in this case is a really great thing. Now, one of the few comments that we got on our post this week was about our Caribbean spiny lobster. Emily had posted this really great video that kind of showed off some of the animals in this exhibit, and our spiny lobsters are definitely eye-catching in the tank. So you can see this morning they're kind of all tucked in to little caves in the blue hole exhibit. But I also really love to talk about spiny lobsters because they're slightly unusual when you look at them for any length of time, in that you're going to notice that they are missing those big claws that we associate with lobsters here in New England. Caribbean spiny lobsters are not quite as territorial as their northern cousins, and so they don't need those big hefty claws for fighting with other lobsters. I like to say that they're the polite lobsters of the ocean. They will actually even line up in order to migrate from place to place. It's called queuing, which is pretty cool. So these guys, while they might not look like the lobster you would expect on your dinner plate, they are definitely one of the lobsters that are consumed here in the U.S. In fact, if you went down to southern Florida and you ordered lobster, the Caribbean spiny lobster is probably the lobster that would show up on your dinner plate. But they're also marketed often as lobster tail. So if you're purchasing only lobster tail, there's a good chance that you're eating a Caribbean spiny lobster. I personally have never had Caribbean spiny lobster to my knowledge, so I can't testify to difference in taste. That's a question that we get a lot about lobster here at the aquarium. But it is not impossible that I have eaten Caribbean spiny lobster. Who knows? They're actually a pretty sustainable seafood. Lobsters are, in general, fairly sustainable because lobster fishermen are pretty good at waiting for lobsters to get big enough to be of a certain size before they're harvested from the ocean. This is actually a slightly different story than with our Goliath groupers. Goliath groupers are a critically endangered species, largely in part due to their slow growth and their behavior. So Goliath groupers, as I mentioned, like to snuggle into certain places, and they usually are found in the same place over and over again, which makes it really easy to predict where they're going to be, which makes it really easy for them to be caught by fishermen. So they are relatively rare within ecosystems, in that as a top predator, they need a lot of resources in order to thrive. So there's usually not a lot of Goliath groupers in any one place. So by removing individuals from that area can actually have a pretty big trickle-down effect within that ecosystem, because as a top predator, they help keep other populations of fish in balance. So there's a lot of rules and regulations about fishing for Goliath grouper now, and that you can't. There's lots of other grouper species in Caribbean reef ecosystems that you still are allowed to fish for and catch, but folks here in the US and all through the Caribbean are working really hard to help protect these Goliath groupers so that they'll be around for a long time to come. So sustainable seafood, always a great choice. If you're interested in learning more about sustainable seafood, you can definitely check out our website at neaq.org for some suggestions on sustainable seafood and some tips and tricks for what you can do in order to choose sustainable seafood at home. At this point, I would love to open up the floor to questions. If anybody has a question, feel free to send it my way, and I will do my best to answer it for you.
We got one question from Brian, and
Awesome.
He's wondering, do you know of any examples of blue holes that have this much life in it?
Do we know any examples of blue holes that have this much life? Absolutely. Most blue holes, kind of up towards the surface, have a lot of life. So the tricky thing about blue holes is they're really, really deep, hundreds of feet deep. In fact, the deepest blue hole is in the South China Sea, and it's called Dragon Hole, and it's close to 1,000 feet deep. So usually after a certain depth, these ecosystems don't have a lot of light and they don't have a lot of oxygen that far down. So at really deep depths, mostly bacteria is what's going to be hanging out in a blue hole, but up towards the surface where that sunlight can still penetrate, you are going to see reef ecosystems just like this one. If you want to check out a really cool example of one, the Great Blue Hole in Belize, you can see a lot. It's a really popular dive site. In fact, Jacques Cousteau, I think, named it as one of the top dive places in the world. And so a lot of people go diving there. So you can check out some really cool pictures of what that blue hole looks like from under the surface. And you will see it looks a lot like the blue hole we have exhibited for you here at the aquarium. Great question. We have any other questions out there this morning, Emily?
Well, Lauren was wondering how old this exhibit is.
How old is this exhibit? That's a really good question, and I'm not sure when this exhibit was installed as a blue hole. But fun fact about the blue hole exhibit is that it was actually a penguin exhibit when the aquarium first opened, and I'm sure you guys are hearing our penguins this morning because they're very chatty first thing in the morning before they get breakfast. But when the aquarium first opened in 1969, this tank had 6 African penguins in it. So there is not a tropical fish to be found in this tank when we first opened. We currently have a little over 100 penguins on exhibit. Definitely not enough space for them in here anymore, so they moved downstairs. But this is one of our largest gallery tanks. It holds 6,000 gallons of water and is so large that actually all of the filtration for this tank is downstairs in the basement, which is where the filtration for our giant ocean tank and the penguin exhibits are, which is pretty cool. Any other questions out there this morning?
Joseph was wondering about the oldest piece of coral.
The oldest piece of coral here at the New England Aquarium? That again would be really tricky. A lot of the coral that you see here at the New England Aquarium is entirely man-made. Our giant ocean tank, in fact, is all man-made coral. The reason for that being the giant ocean tank coral reef would be over 1,000 years old if it were to grow naturally in the wild. So you wouldn't want to take something that large and that important out of the ocean. So if we have live coral here at the aquarium, that coral is often grown by us in-house. So I'm not sure if any of the coral itself is older than what we would have grown here at the aquarium, but what I do know is that pieces of coral in the live coral tank downstairs on the first floor have been in that tank since that tank was established in the early 80s. So there is some coral that has been growing here at the New England Aquarium longer than I've been alive, which is pretty cool. Any other questions out there this morning?
Lauren was wondering, are we looking into breeding Goliath groupers?
Are we going to breed Goliath groupers? That is a really good question. So we here at the New England Aquarium are probably not going to be breeding Goliath groupers anytime soon. For the larval fish program that I was talking about, we're trying to raise species that we have in abundance here at the aquarium. So gobies are a great example of this. In our giant ocean tank, you can see smallmouth grunts, which are part of that larval fish program. Also, our lip downs, which are these really kind of flattened, perfectly round fish that you can also see in the giant ocean tank. But raising larval fish is really, really tricky business. So we want to make sure that we're raising fish that we can home here at the aquarium for the duration of their life. As you can see, our Goliath groupers are really big fish, so it would probably be challenging for us to home them here at the New England Aquarium, and finding homes for fish that could live to be into their 50s, maybe even into their 100s. We're not really sure with Goliath groupers just yet how long they could live to be, and grow to be up to 8 feet in length is a tricky job. So probably not going to be raising Goliath groupers here at the New England Aquarium, but there have been Goliath groupers successfully reared in other aquariums around the country, which is pretty cool. So we're not doing it here, but it has happened. Great question. Any other questions from our Facebook Live viewers this morning? Thank you guys for all these amazing questions. I love it. Keep them coming.
Do they have names? Do the Goliath groupers
Do
have
the
names?
Goliath groupers have names? That is a really good, as far as I know, they do not have names. We had a very grumpy Goliath grouper in the Blue Hole exhibit at one point, which we affectionately named Oscar, but Oscar actually went on to another aquarium. You can actually go to the Camden Aquarium in New Jersey and visit Oscar, the Goliath grouper.
I think that's it we have now, but they can comment and we'll try to.
Yeah, so I'll talk about a few other fun facts about our Blue Hole exhibit that I love to share with folks, actually on behind the scenes tours. So we are not going to go behind the scenes this morning in order to see the Blue Hole tank, and the reason for that being is it's not very exciting to see from behind the scenes, but I like to talk a little bit about it because of the challenge for maintaining this exhibit. So as you can see, this is a beautiful reef tank, again, all salt water. So it does require a bit of maintenance and also some animal care. Jeremy, who is our head aquarist for this gallery, is pretty amazing. He also happens to be a little over 6 feet tall. So if he needs to get into this tank, he actually has to get in full scuba gear because he has to be fully submerged in order to get in and clean and also do any animal care stuff that has to happen in the tank. Now, the entrance to this tank is not quite Jeremy's sized. In fact, in order to get into this exhibit, the opening is probably a little over 2 feet tall and probably a little wider than maybe 3 feet. So it is a little tricky in order to get into this tank. And if we ever need to take fish out of the tank, that can also be really tricky. Occasionally, our Goliath groupers do need veterinary exams. In order to remove them from this exhibit, we actually have to get them to swim into a hammock that kind of functions as a bag/net, and give them some light anesthesia in order to move them out of this exhibit. Now, when we have to do this, the Goliath groupers don't really just like to swim into the bag. So Jeremy has to get into the water with the groupers and actually herd them into this special fish bag. So sometimes I like to refer to Jeremy as the fish cowboy of the aquarium because he's often wrangling Goliath groupers in the Blue Hole exhibit. So if you're ever lucky enough to be here on a day when Jeremy is in this exhibit, it is a sight to see. Another fun fact about our Goliath groupers is that scientists are actually getting closer to aging Goliath groupers. So we did have a question about whether or not we knew kind of about them and how old they were. And so maybe Jeremy's, one of Jeremy's interns will help us figure this out one day. So Goliath groupers have spines in their dorsal fin. That's the fin that goes along their back. And what scientists have figured out recently is that their dorsal spines have growth rings, kind of like a tree. And so if you look at the growth rings, and they actually will go up vertically, that you can kind of estimate how old the grouper is by counting those rings. So maybe eventually if we get a really good picture of the growth rings on our Goliath groupers' dorsal fins, we can figure out how old they are. So that's some relatively new science about Goliath groupers, which is pretty cool. Aging ocean animals is always really hard. It's probably one of the #1 questions that we get about animals here at the aquarium, and probably one of the hardest questions to answer, simply because a lot of animals don't have anything on their body that tells you how old they are, and unless you've followed them their entire lives, it's really tricky to know how old they are. So maybe someday I will figure it out with our Goliath groupers, thanks to new science. Any last questions out there on Facebook Live this morning? Awesome. Well, I think at this point then, my friends, we'll go ahead and wrap it up. I'll let you guys enjoy our blue hole for a few more minutes while I do our little wrap up. If you have any more questions about our blue hole, Goliath groupers, Peruvian spiny lobsters, anything that you've seen here in this tank this morning, please feel free to post it. We would be happy to answer them for you after this video is over. We are going to do another one of these on the first Friday of next month. So keep your eyes out for that post. If you want to hear about something specific at the aquarium, we're open to suggestions. Post it in the comments. We'd love to know what you guys want to learn about. Other than that, thank you so much for joining us this morning, and I hope you all have an awesome Friday.